Baldur's Gate 3, where not only is a heavy armored dual-wielding Ranger Knight build viable, it's strong, fun, and unique. Now any finesse weapons will work with this build, and you'll still get to take advantage of things like sneak attack, Hunter's Mark, and extra attacks for additional damage. Fight in the open, or sulk away in the shadows. It's your choice. The gameplay is straightforward, so let's go ahead and cover the build. At level 1, we're obviously going to select the Ranger. And for favored enemy, we're going to pick the Ranger Knight. This is going to give us skill proficiency in history, as well as armor proficiency with heavy armor. Very important for this build since we're going with a melee-based build. We're going to be subject to a ton of attacks coming our way, and the higher the armor class, the better. Now for our Natural Explorer, this may vary depending on which character you're using. If you're using your main character, or even respecing a different companion, Beast Tamer is a pretty good option. However, if you're using Minsk specifically, Find Familiar will not work in conjunction with Boo. You can only have one or the other out. It will dismiss whichever one you have cast first. So in this case, we're going to pick Wasteland Wanderer. And this is just because fire is the most common of the elements that can be selected. Lastly, Urban Tracker isn't a terrible option either, especially if you don't have anybody covering the thieving skills in your party. In my situation, I have this covered, so I'm able to go for that fire resistance here. For ability scores, we're going to talk about a loadout that will work from level 1 to level 12. If you have access to endgame gear, this could change dramatically. There are several pieces in the game that allow you to change your stat to a specific number once you equip it. For strength, we're going to put this at 10. We don't want any negatives here, and we want some ability to jump because it's actually going to be a somewhat useful mobility tool for us. We will eventually have access to Misty Step in this build because we just want that increased mobility as well. However, we don't want to make sure that we have any negatives here because you will make use of this more than you think to close gaps and so forth. Dexterity, we're going to boost to 17 for now. We will eventually boost this up all the way to 20. And again, you may find items in the game that can boost this further, but for the sake of this guide, we're just going to cover a general build. Constitution, we're going to go to 14. We're going to focus primarily on concentration spells, and because of that, we want to have a relatively decent saving throw with our Constitution. In fact, we're going to reserve the majority of our spell slots for concentration spells, so you want to make sure that you have Constitution here, whether it be for the saving throw or just the additional hit points being on the front line. Intelligence as well as Charisma, we can tank down to 8. We're just not going to use these stats whatsoever, and we need the points in better spots elsewhere. For Wisdom, we'll go up to 16 using the additional bonus point. We're actually going to leave the Wisdom here for the course of the game. And again, if you find things during the playthrough that allow you to boost this, you certainly can. But since the majority of our spells are not going to target enemies, they're in fact going to target ourselves, we will have some that target enemies, so we want a decent score here, but we don't need to go to an excessive level. For skill proficiencies, I find Athletics nice just because we're on the front line. Same for Acrobatics. Stealth, we will be making use of this whether we are going to multi-class or stay a pure ranger. Stealth is actually handy. You can have this character stay out of combat while hiding and then choose when to initiate and engage in combat, dealing some large amounts of damage. So the added stealth, it just allows you to do that easier. Nature, you really have to put a point somewhere. I don't have nature covered personally, so I chose that, but you could go with any of these other remaining options. At level 2, we get a pair of spells as well as a fighting style. For the spells, we're going to select Hunter's Mark as the first choice. This is going to mark a creature dealing an additional 1 to 6 damage whenever you hit it. We're dual wielding, so we'll get twice the benefit out of this. This spell is also incredible because you get to cast this once, and if the target dies, you can recast it onto another target without using another spell slot. On top of that, it's a bonus action, meaning you can start your turn off casting the Hunter's Mark, then run up to the target and use your regular action to take advantage of this in the same turn. Second, we're going to take Long Strider. This is going to increase a creature's movement speed by 3 meters. This lasts until a long rest, meaning that we can cast this at the start of the day and have it just benefit us throughout the entire day. Again, we want to make sure that we're mobile with this character and have the ability to get on the targets that we're looking to pick off. For fighting style, we're going to select 2-weapon fighting. Again, we're dual wielding, and when you make an attack with your offhand weapon, you can add your ability modifier to the damage of the attack. This is going to increase this dramatically, giving us a lot more damage. At level 3, we'll get an additional spell as well as a subclass choice. And for spells, I like to take Enhanced Leap at this point. You can cast this before combat, and it lasts for 10 turns. So if you know that there's most likely a fight brewing, you could cast this, initiate the dialogue, and then take advantage of this once the combat begins. And that would allow you to still have an action, say, using your melee attack once it begins, rather than having to waste a turn buffing yourself with this to get to the location of an enemy. For subclass, any of these are viable. For the purpose of this guide, I'm going to cover Gloomstalker because I think that's the most popular, but I want you to know that I've tried all 3 of these and they all work. Gloomstalker is going to give us Dread Ambusher. This is a +3 bonus to initiative, just nice for getting that first turn of combat. You're also going to get an additional 3 meters movement speed on the first turn, as well as being able to make an attack that deals an additional 1d8. So again, we're just stacking mobility here. We want high initiative, which is part of the reason we're using dexterity instead of strength for this build. And on top of that, we're getting more and more damage, and this is just going to continue to add up as we add more levels to the build. Superior Dark Vision. We can see up to 24 meters. This is nice. We don't get a huge advantage from this for this particular build. There are range versions of the Gloomstalker which get more benefit out of this, but nonetheless, this will still help in certain situations. Dread Ambusher Hide. You can now hide from enemies by succeeding stealth checks, as well as Umbral Shroud. You can wrap yourself in shadows to become invisible if you are obscured. Overall, just really a very versatile build that you can get into the mix of things, and then once you've been seen or opened in combat, since you're wearing heavy armor, you don't have to worry so much about getting out immediately. But you can if you want. At level 4, we'll get our first feat. What I like to select here is Athlete. This allows us to increase our dexterity to 18. Additionally, when we're prone, standing up uses significantly less movement, and our jump distance also increases by 50%. This is just going to increase the mobility of this build. The most important thing for us is to get to targets, be able to move from one to another, because this build is going to specialize in basically getting on key targets and picking them off with large damage. Level 5, we'll gain a second level spell as well as an additional attack. And this extra attack is just going to increase our damage. Very nice to have. For a spell here, I like to select Pass Without Trace, and this is just going to give us some added utility, increasing our stealth check while outside of combat. And again, you're just able to get to where you want to be and open on the correct target to maximize your chance of success in the battle. For Gloomstalker, we'll actually get Misty Step. This is going to dramatically increase our mobility. This does cost a spell slot, so make sure that we're using this sparingly because we don't have an enormous amount of spell slots with this build. At level 6, we'll get to pick a favorite enemy and another natural explorer. For the favorite enemy, I like to select Bounty Hunter at this point. Honestly, you could go with any of these choices, whatever you feel will benefit you the most. In this case, creatures you hit with Ensnaring Strike, either ranged or melee, have disadvantage on their saving throw. I just find this the most useful out of the options here. It's really Ranger Knight that we're after, and we already have that. Natural Explorer. At this point, I pick up the Wasteland Wanderer Cold. This is the second most common of the elements available here. And again, if you took one of the other choices, Beast Tamer or Urban Tracker, for the first time, you could obviously select Fire for the second time here. Level 7 will gain another spell as well as a subclass feature, Iron Mind. This will allow us to have proficiency in Wisdom and Intelligence saving throws. For the spell, at this point I like to pick up Spike Growth, just basically a large AoE that has half movement for anything within it, and creatures walking on the spikes take 2d4 piercing damage for every 1.5 meters that they move. It just gives you a little bit of control. Keep in mind this is a concentration spell, so if you have Hunter's Mark on a target, casting this will then remove the Hunter's Mark, and you'll have to reapply it. At level 8, we'll gain a class feature as well as another feat. For the class feature, we get Land Stride, Difficult Terrain. You become an expert at moving through the wilderness. Difficult terrain no longer slows you down. This is just an amazing pickup for us. We can essentially just move wherever we want without reducing our movement speed. Very nice, especially for this class having limited mobility. For the feat, at this point we want to pick up Ability Improvement to push that dexterity up to 20. At level 9, you'll have to make a choice. And honestly, they're pretty equal overall. It's just more of a preference. This is whether you want to go to level 12 as a ranger. Going to level 12 as a ranger will give you the spell Fear at level 9 for your subclass, as well as Stalker's Flurry at level 11. Stalker's Flurry allows you to re-roll a miss on an attack, so this can add up to being a good source of damage overall. If you go the route of being a rogue, you'll get a feat when you have 4 levels in that, as well as at level 3, the subclass Thief will give you an extra bonus action per turn. I find the Thief route not only more consistent, but you get some additional proficiencies which round out the character really nice. So that's what we're going to show here. So we'll put our first level into Rogue here. For abilities, like I said, we'll get these additional proficiencies. At this point, I like to take Stealth as well as double Sleight of Hand, and this is just going to round out the build. Now, if you don't have thieving skills covered, this will be a really good boost. If you have somebody that's very proficient in those, you could still take something like Athletics or even Acrobatics here and round out your character more so in that regard. Ultimately up to you and what the rest of your party composition has. At level 10, with the second level in Rogue, we pick up 3 actions, and I feel that these are very underrated by a lot of people. Cunning Action Hide, this counts as a bonus action. Cunning Action Dash, which is a bonus action, as well as Cunning Action Disengage, and this is my personal favorite here. As a bonus action, you can disengage from the target. So why this is nice for this particular character is if we kill target, say as combat starts, and then the enemies swarm on us, well, we can use this bonus action on our next turn, walk freely away from those enemies, and then get on another key target, say another caster, and take that one out as well without suffering multiple opportunity attacks. Really works well for this build. At level 11, we'll take our third level into Rogue. This gives us access to our subclass. In this case, we're going to pick the Thief, and the reason for that is we get fast hands. We get an additional bonus action, just adds utility or allows us to make an additional attack. Also gets second story work. You master the art of falling and gain resistance to falling damage. This certainly doesn't hurt. It's not the best ability in the game, but it's certainly useful from time to time. At level 12, we'll put a fourth level into Rogue, and this is to get access to another feat. And there are an enormous amount of options here, and hopefully I get them all. You could take ability improvement if you had a stat that you wanted to boost up by 2, or perhaps you found something during the playthrough that made one of these other stats increased and you wanted to boost it even further. You could take alert. This will give you even more of a bonus to initiative, and you can't be surprised. This character has pretty good initiative, but if you wanted to ensure that you basically act first every time, that's an option. You can take defensive duelist when attacked while wielding a finesse weapon, which will most likely be using that you're proficient in. You can use a reaction to add your proficiency bonus to your armor class. This is just another great defensive tool to add on top of the heavy armor that we have. Dual wielder is an option. You get a +1 bonus to armor class just all the time, basically for having 2 weapons equipped. You could also take heavy armor master. This will increase your strength by 1, which we aren't so interested in this unless you've picked up another point elsewhere. What we really want from this is the incoming damage from non-magical attacks decreased by 3 while you're wearing heavy armor. This just really mitigates a ton of damage as you go throughout the playthrough. We also have other options further down. You could take something like Savage Attacker. When making weapon attacks, you roll your damage dice twice and use the highest result. This does add up to a significant amount of damage since we're dual wielding and getting a large number of attacks. Adds a lot more consistency to the damage die and will increase the damage overall. Sentinel is also a choice. Like I said, ton of options you can go here. Ultimately, the choice is up to you. Personally, what I've been using as of most recently is actually this defensive duelist, and I've had pretty good success with it. So I'm going to keep using this in this situation. This build works well from level 1 all the way up to level 12 or max level. You also don't have to worry too much about equipment. There's a lot of pieces of equipment that'll benefit this build. Essentially, you can wear your best piece of heavy armor just for added mitigation, a pair of finesse weapons to dual wield, a ranged weapon for when you can't get into melee range, and the rest of the pieces of gear can either buff your damage or add utility for you to utilize with this build as well. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch, and have a great day.